on this computer. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Chinese Medicine Integral Collective for our beginning summer edition. And it's just great to all be together tonight. The topic we'll be discussing tonight is Eros and Agape, and I'll introduce that topic. But first, we're going to have Alexander and Lorie are just going to set a context about the kind of discussions that we're having, and what intersubjective dialogue is, and sort of the parameters of what's interesting about it and what it requires from us. So Lorie and Alexander, take it away. Thanks.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So glad to be back with all of you listeners and those of us in the group here on Zoom. And yeah, so our exploration here in these conversations is to explore a different way of interacting with one another. And there was a period of time where people began looking at language as something that exists as a dimension of philosophy, that the spoken word is this expression that is deeply embedded in our nervous system and in the evolution of our interior. And so we can see that language has these very deep structures of yin and yang in them. We can speak in active, I make people sleepy. We can speak in passive, I am sleepy. Something's happening to me. And so when we look into language, we can see that it has the deep structures of the cosmos in it, and it's growing up as we grow up. And so our exploration here is to try to catalyze the deepest potentials that we can in dialogue. So rather than speaking about what we already know and bring a bunch of ideas as experts, the invitation is to see how can language as a generative force carry us into new possibility. So I'll leave it there for now and see, Lorie, if you wanted to add something.
Well, we had spoken a little bit earlier, communicated, and I knew that you were moving into this conversation about language itself and the linguistics of intersubjectivity. So I've been sitting with that as well today. And what comes to me, and also moving from what you're saying, for me, the experience of the kinds of conversations that we co-generate in this space allows us to enter into or create a kind of conduit that moves us from subject object, the normal or accepted way that we language, as you said, either I'm acting on you or I'm being acted upon, into a kind of mutuality, where I think of it as moving beyond this I-you experience. I know this, I'm telling you about it, you know that, you're telling me, into a kind of generative space of we. But at the same time, each of us staying unique in our own individuality, which is, for my experience of that, is that it's an evolutionary leap and is actively transforming our nervous systems as we engage in the process. So that's what's really exciting. That's why every time we get together, I'm like excited. I'm looking forward to it, because I feel like something's actually, it's like we're actively engaged in transforming our nervous systems together, learning a new way to be in awareness together. And I'm not going to go, there's so much around that, but we're just introducing. But the key thing I want to say here is that through this process of being together in this way, it's as if we're creating a space of refuge. It's like a refuge from the tyranny of dualism. and the tyranny of having to know and be right, and entering into this almost sacred collectivity. And, there are ways that we're doing it. And I think people who are listening and all the wonderful responses that we're getting, people are, experiencing the process. But the key thing is this oscillation between our internal environment and the group space, and then the pauses that allow for something beyond any of us to become present. But it will only become present through our being together.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add that I just want to invite the listeners into also is that my experience is that when we do these kinds of dialogues, I'm continually surprised. Something begins to pop in the collective voicing of something that feels unexpected. It feels a surprise. There's room for this sort of evolutionary blooming. And so I would just like to invite our listeners to rest into that possibility with us, that we can all be surprised.
Okay, beautiful introduction. Vansanthi, I'd just like to ask you to move your camera in a way so we can see your whole face. Just so your face is a little higher, if you can, because for most of that, there we go. Good, beautiful, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to discuss tonight and see where we can go with is the topic of Eros and Agape. And the thing that struck me, about Chinese medicine when I first practiced was the capacity to form highly nuanced differentiations for every patient. And everyone was so unique. And everybody was so individual. And Chinese medicine could just embrace that. So, one person was water and wood within fire, and another person was earth within metal within water, and everybody's story was so interesting. And as a few years went on in clinical practice, I became increasingly interested in what I noticed was most people actually have very similar or same stories, and the differences are names, places, and dates. And that there are huge forces at work on us that seem to be at work on everyone. So yes, somebody's water within wood, within fire, and you do heart 7, the source point, and somebody else is wood within earth, within metal, and you do lung 9, the source point. And it's all, I recognize that we're sort of all out in that wheel and being acted upon by genetic forces, cultural forces. And over time, it struck me forces of cosmic dimension. And so, well, it is true and that we have this imperative to form a highly differentiated diagnosis for each person. On the one hand, on the other hand, there are huge forces of heaven and earth at work within all of us that are impersonal in nature, really, and archetypical. And these can be broken down 2 ways we can talk about yin and yang, we can talk about heaven and earth. Tonight, we're phrasing them as Eros and Agape. And I understand Eros as the creative thrust from kidney 1 up to GV20 along the left half of the Sheng cycle. The rising of the creative force within us, the kidney 1 being that eye on the bottom of the foot staring into the abyss, and GV20 being the top of the liver channel, the eye at the top of the head, and the Hun being the creative visioning spirit striving up the left half of the cycle from Jing through the exertion of Qi in wood up through the opening of the heart as a lotus, as fire on the left hand of the cycle. And that is the erotic impulse, and it longs for union. And when expressed through the lower dimensions of the self, at first that's physical union. And as we get to higher dimensions, it becomes union of hearts, union of souls, until we get to the highest dimension, which is really an experience of union in spirit and the recognition of there just being one. And so I understand Eros as the love of the lower for the higher, the striving of the lower toward union with the higher. This is the left side of the pulses, the kidney, the liver, and the heart. And dysfunction on that side tends to be represented in a lack of will, a lack of ambition, a lack of striving, or an excess of it that could be expressed as, live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. The 27 Club, never sleeping, never feeding yourself, not hydrating, just create, 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 if we gave ourselves to that completely. And we can understand that as the urge to become, and we can understand it therapeutically as the imperative in healing to change. The imperative to evolve, the imperative to deepen and broaden our view and to evolve. So Eros is the creative impulse, the evolutionary impulse, the erotic impulse, the fire pushing its way higher. And that is balanced on the right side of the cycle by agape. And I would understand agape as the influx of heaven into us as it becomes blood and muscles. So the left half of the cycle has more to do with the question of how, as physical beings, do we evolve spirit through us? And the right half of the cycle, the digestive system, is more about how out of light do we create a body? And so I understand agape as the love of the higher for the lower, the motherly embrace, the top-down embrace of the higher for the lower. The Eros is the love and the striving for union with the absolute. And agape is the love of that top-down, of that witness, the unconditional loving top-down view of the witness that represses nothing, sees everything as it is, and holds it. So whereas Eros is that imperative to evolve and change, agape has very much to do with accepting things as they are, with being rather than becoming. And I understand agape, whereas Eros I expressed more as the kidney 1 to GV20, I think about agape more as spleen 21 to heart 1. So if we begin the circulation of chi with heart 1, that big bang, 364 points later, we come to Da Bao, great enveloping, which the characters show a fetus within the womb. And that point is the great low point, distributing the benefit of all the work we've done through the year, to the previous 364 days and points, to every aspect of being, so that we experience ourselves as Eros is experiencing ourselves as love, agape experiencing ourselves as loved in the world, as still in the womb, as existing in life, in the motherly embrace of that total care. And the downside of Eros is the potential to just burn out. And the downside of agape would be the tendency toward inertia and toward consumption and just becoming more and more physically and weighed down and to not evolve. And so what we strive for is this balance of being and becoming, this strive toward this perfect balance of truth and compassion. And so I experience these forces, and I experience these forces at work in the clinic, I did more and more and more. For the first few years, everyone was a unique individual. And then in time, I just came to see we're all subjected to the same forces. And the question tonight really is, how do we experience Eros and Agape? How do we experience them in ourselves? What do they mean to us? And how do we experience them as healers? I express it as that striving toward the balance of truth and compassion, being and becoming. I think that each individual and each tradition is going to have a sort of inclination more toward one of these than the other. And what's interesting to me and unique in an integral tradition is just the imperative to be able to hold both. So for me, you know, I'm a woody kind of go creative kind of, you know, God, let the dead bury the dead, straight ahead. And so for me, there's just been, there's a lot of work in terms of, you know, my challenge has always been in being and accepting things as they are and nurturing things as they are. I've always been one to try to engender the imperative to change. And I'm sure for others of us, you know, it's much the other way toward agape. And so this is sort of a background of how I understand the contexts, and we see where we can go with that. And just to say, I gave the Hun a shout out for Eros, and the balance there for agape would be Po, the Po, right? So the Hun is the expansive force, and the Po is a contractive force, the breathing in of the sunlight, the breathing in of heaven's influence, and the taking in the peristalsis in digestion to be able to assimilate and abstract meaning from experience to create a self out of.
This is so thought-provoking. Like there are so many things that are buzzing through my mind that I could take it in a number of directions. The part about agape being Po was something that I didn't expect at all. That my experience of, or my relationship with agape is this, you know, this all-encompassing, well, I'll share something that this happened after we decided what this topic was about, or was going to be. And the same day, I was speaking to somebody who was talking about the idea of the importance of self-love. And I wondered, like, where does self-love fit in terms of Eros and Agape? And I was just kind of sitting with it for a while, and it just put it into the field of awareness without attempting to answer it, but just feeling it. And in a very, you know, unimportant moment, I was walking up the stairs, just turning the corner, going up the stairs. And all of a sudden I had this hit of love. I was by myself. It was it was an opening at every level where there was no subject, object. I was the beloved. I was the loving. It was so immense. I just teared up, and it was like, this is self-love. This is self-love. The capital S self-love that can't be divided into Eros and Agape, can't be divided into Randine as the one who is loving or the one who is being loved. It was overwhelming. And it was like the concepts of Eros and Agape, like in that moment, were just kind of rendered irrelevant. Like this was something, it seemed to diminish it by even calling it love based on my reference to that word.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to just kind of put that in the field because it's so fresh in my experience.
And can you articulate the attributes of that experience and that perspective? I mean, you've done a good job, but maybe.
Like a blinding intensity. It didn't have it didn't have an emotional quality. It didn't have, I mean, I could have said it was, absolute elation, but it actually wasn't, because it didn't feel like movement at all. It just felt kind of like a field phenomenon where there was nothing but the intensity of this. And I've never had an experience like that before. So I've had, experiences that were much easier to articulate, that came through processes, but this one was just like a club on the head or an arrow to the heart or something that came out of no practice, no intention. There was none of this. My whole life I've been kind of in this process of longing for union and having tastes of the union. But there was always like a method or a retreat or a meditation or some sort of cultivation practice. This was just like, my dear, you can't get there. This is coming to you. But it still wasn't a receiving, because that was a direction. There wasn't even a meeting. It was beyond two things meeting. It was just one thing happening. And I found myself in the midst of it. So that's not really giving any qualities, I don't think, but that was my best way of putting words around it. I'm kind of embarrassed in Alexander's, like, the importance of the words themselves, and then the inability of the words to wrap themselves around such an experience. I'm at a loss.
You conveyed it pretty well.
Brings out for me this sense of one of the things that comes up as I'm listening with you is the exploring agape and eros as a co-penetrating, sort of co-emergent event. And it brings me into this experience of these moments when there can be one's identity can be this omnipresent, all-pervading, loving embrace, while at the same time experiencing the sort of karmic veils of separation as an individual, and that these can happen at the same time, where in one moment there is both this incredible love that knows that nothing needs to change and that all there is love and embrace. And then at the very same moment, arising within that love is a dimension of self that is in contraction and that desires its sense of union. And sometimes, even as they both coexist, you know, I have this experience that the dimension of self that's in contraction, it can't somehow absorb what it's being enveloped by. And that creates this sort of suffering process until there's an uncurling, an unfurling, an unfolding, where there's that that evolutionary blooming process, wherein then the sort of the Eros and the Agape, the growing and the forever embracing somehow fully interpenetrate. And then my nervous system relaxes.
So I say that sometimes I think I've experienced that agape as something that takes over from me. I mean, it's orchestrating something, and it usually happens when I'm surrendering or I've given up or something. I'm not pushing against, and it comes over me and does the thing for me. Or in the clinic, I'd say it's a kind of knowing that comes through me, and it's not of me. The problem with words is that words have sentences have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have a timeline, and these things transcend time. So I don't know what Randine was experiencing, but it almost felt to me like she stepped out of duality.
Mhm.
You know, and how do we speak about those moments? When our language is trapped in the concepts of duality. At least
that's the
I
whole.
don't have vocabulary to transcend that. Maybe you do, Lonny.
No, that's what we're striving toward. That's what this is.
Yeah. So I put it in the realm of feeling and opt out of the use of words.
Be right back.
Maybe you just stepped out of my space-time duality. You've come back with a camera, so I think I'm just going to mute myself.
A 400-pound bear just walked through my backyard. So you guys carry on.
Wow. Oh,
He's going after. Okay, sorry.
perfect that entered the field.
It's beautiful. It's very powerful. It's tearing down the bird feeder I just put in. Okay, keep going. Nothing to see here.
I feel, Vansanthi, like you're speaking to something so foundational to our medicine and everything we do, but also foundational to this question of dialogue that we're also inhabiting together. And it's funny, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this sort of, well, first of all, of course, I keep hearing, you know, the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. So they've already, you know, like way back 3,000 years ago, the very thing that we're grappling with was already a question, because then it goes on to say, and yet the Tao can be known, you know, through the mysterious feminine, through the world of nature, and the cycles and the rhythms, we get an embodied experience of what cannot be necessarily languaged. But being a writer and being someone, really, I mean, my whole nervous system is intertwined with word. I can't quite, I've always been like, yes, but that the Tao somehow can be spoken because we speak it in the treatment room when we give the spirit of the point, when we go into the characters and actually the energetic of the characters or the words come through our bodies. I feel like language essentially is magical. We may have lost our connection to that resonance level, but for me, I can't abide by this idea that language is purely symbolic and it's completely separate from, like, the experience, Randine, that you had, because you transmitted it to us. And you transmitted it to us through your words. I mean, yes, through your presencing and through your amazing capacity to extend your presencing, which is something that I know of you and I be with you, but you also spoke to us. Like, we were there, we heard the story, it was alive. So yeah, I think we're playing right at this sort of razor's edge of what language is. And it's really also primary to what we're trying to do right here. Is find a way to speak with, to, from, that isn't divorcing, but rather is entwining us.
I think there's something there about the relationship between the voice and the heart, and there's something about what's living in the heart. When it's first encountered, perhaps there's a sense of just quality or state. We could maybe say that, but on the other hand, we've been learning how to name things our entire life. And so there's a way in which our interiority and the capacity for language and naming have also been co-born. And so if I were to say something like, the timeless, boundless Tao is the ground from which the erotic arrow fiercely pierces through the fabric of the sky to then rain celestial nectar down upon us to, right? That imagery is not just a symbol. And how long would I have to sit here and say nothing and transmit timeless boundlessness, the erotic arrow, and then the raining of agape into all the wounds that need to be healed? That there's a way in which the symbolism and the language are so deeply intimate with the state qualities of being, that my sense is that there's kind of a marriage in, like, the yang use of language is kind of like the yang officials, it's like a carrier for the essence of being that from some perspective can't be named. And yet the yang can kind of land us into something that we're like, oh yeah, that's called love. And it's healing.
I mean, language is vibration. And when you were speaking, Randine, I mean, in transcendence of the mind, using language can seem to objectify and take us away from union. But going another step further, I mean, what's speaking is what's listening. There's just one thing. And when you were talking, what I was really struck by, what I felt in myself was how moved you were by the experience and a very, very deep sense of care, like a real profound sense of care. And for me, I mean, you know, we make these dualities, yin and yang, heaven and earth, Eros and Agape, and we can speak about our experiences of non-duality in the past, like I had this experience. But, you know, right here, right now, here we are, we're one, and we're engaged. This is medicine. We're engaging in medicine, and I look forward to these things, and I'm excited about them because I will find myself and come to know myself in a deeper way. And I think that certainly language can be a barrier, but it's music. And from a certain perspective, it's the leading edge of cosmic evolution. It's the Tao talking about itself, struggling to articulate its experience. So here we are, 15 billion years into an explosion, at least around here. And we are, as I speak, as we speak, and as we listen, and as we hear, we are that one knowing itself, and we can hold ourselves in that non-dual space, and at the same time strive to make ever increased nuanced distinctions. And so that profound care, on the one hand, I've always had a profound care when it comes to doing, and when it comes to articulating in that sort of left-hand Sheng cycle sort of creative way. But there's also this profound aspect of care in just the embrace of everything as it is, as being the perfect opportunity to work the medicine, to go deeper, to learn, and I've, you know, it's always been relatively easier for me to be generous and compassionate toward others. And I learn more and more about agape as exercising that care as just a deep embrace toward myself for all the ways that I am not yet at union with the highest I know to be true. As Alexander said, sort of, you know, to have that unconditional love and loving witness position toward myself, as I actually am, as I actually am right here and right now, not just as an ideal that I'm striving toward, that I'm inspired by, but toward the self I actually am, with whatever contradictions and divisions there are within me, to have a wholehearted and loving embrace, motherly, nurturing embrace of that. Anyway.
Boy, that is so palpable. Like I can receive that. It's like that receptivity, the secret of the receptive, that taking in. It feels like an enlivening of the Po, the ability for that intaking spirit to receive these words and to receive this acknowledgement, and to take that incoming, which I feel as care, I feel as love, I feel as recognition, as understanding, and to let that in. And letting that in is so much more vulnerable and challenging, and like, can it get into the cells a little deeper? Can it go even beyond the cells by its ability to penetrate?
The cells are just floating in an infinite ocean of it.
Yeah, the field has been enlivened, folks.
I'm really moved by this because, you know, in my own, as everyone knows, like I've been doing a lot of musing and meditation and reflection on the Po soul for many, many years, and the distortions of how that aspect of the medicine is portrayed in some of the texts. And the problematic grasping quality, Lonnie, that you even speak to in that right side of the Shen cycle, in that I loved what you said, as we're taking light and turning it into form, there can be this kind of greed or grasping. And I've been sitting with so much, because I feel it's like, for me, it's the dominant pathology of modernity, is that this distortion of the function of the Po soul, and it's it's being turned into a kind of space of addiction, accumulation. And what I've come to in all of this musing and thinking and sitting with how do we begin to heal this level, what I got, and what's sort of blowing my mind here in listening to you, everyone speaking, is that the Po needs our care. It's like it needs to come out of exile. The body soul needs to be seen in its sacredness, and that we bring that. And I'm, in this conversation, I'm seeing that the care is a quality of agape, where we really, really see that we are disintegrating, that there is a natural kind of disintegration of the physical body. There's a giving over every moment that we exhale, and to really bring our care to this part of ourselves, the vulnerability of the body, and at the same time, the sacredness of it, that is just as sacred as the rising up towards spirit on the left side, is this giving back over to that deep, what I think of as the yin aspect of the divine. So care, was beautiful that Randine, Lonnie, you like, yes, that's really, I think if there's anything I would name as a healing that needs to happen right now on the planet, it's that.
The sacredness of dissolving is beautiful. Just to enhance that quality of, I'm here doing a bunch of work on death and dying, and so that's what I'm immersed in. But the sacred process of dissolving as the honoring of the Po soul is so exquisitely tender, and something that really needs to be, I think, magnified and honored and cared for, tended to.
Yes, one of the great things with these sort of conversations is that there indeed, as Alexander was saying at the beginning, there is a surprise, right? Like Randine said at the beginning, also so many different strands of thoughts, but one that comes to mind immediately was the same for me. How are we bringing the Po together with the concept of agape or so? I was almost thinking opposite, but indeed, the longer I think about it, this is a very appropriate way of entering into that topic. If I remember correctly, right, the Frank Fiedler, who is an I Ching translator, is already not alive. He used to be a professor in Berlin. He had this concept of the Hun and the Po. The oldest meaning of that is the light of the moon that is reflected off the convex side of the moon when it's facing the earth. And then there is the dark side of the moon, the convex side of the moon. When that is facing the Earth, it seems to swallow all the light, and we have the dark moon. And so we've got this Hun and Po as these two, the light that is independent of physicality, that can travel, that we can send out through the acupuncture points when we're dreaming. We can treat other people over a distance. Those are all Hun phenomena, whereas the Po is the dead rock, is the physicality of the moon without the light. So the Po spirits, from a limited perspective, they couldn't be more animalistic. They couldn't be more instinctive. It's breathing and pooping and eating and the heartbeat, all of these autonomous kinds of things. Yet, on the other hand, the lung and the large intestine, where that spirit lives, is metal. And metal is, yes, that's even more material than earth. And is at the end of the I Ching map of reality, where it goes from the Tao consciousness of the thoughts of God or the universe to the momentum when the universe wants to express itself in physical form. That in the I Ching is called qi, then to the realm of symbols, to the realm of physical form, and finally three-dimensional sticks and table reality. And then, the Tao is, of course, water that then evolves to the momentum that wants to express itself. That creative drive is the Qi, is wood, and we end up with metal, is our reality that we live in. And it's very easy to get stuck in that. And I feel exactly that's the crisis of modernity, indeed, where anything that we spend 95% of our time is like thinking about, how do I accumulate more stuff? How do I satisfy these physical instincts to make my body comfortable? But then we are surprised, why is that not enough to make us happy? It's maybe not so much because the heart isn't engaged or so, but because the metal is not the antenna that it's supposed to be to find its way, because metal is, again, generating water, is precisely that. It's not that what should lead us away from the Tao, but the instrument that should reunite us with the Tao. And that's why I was just earlier today looking at the first 2 points of the lung channel, and both lung 1 and lung 2, they have immense spiritual implications. Like these first point, that you've had multiple ways to translate that, but one of is central government or administration, and is a very pointing to a place on earth where emperors Yao, Shun, and Yu used to live, and where they were performing spiritual rituals, and that's what they are meant to their stand for. And the next point, even more, Yunmen, the cloud gate, that's not only places in China are called that way, and we can visualize these Chinese landscape paintings where the mountains are like noses that exhale and breathe, because the pathology of that point is you can't breathe, right? Shortness of breath on like the physical symbol for that. But the deeper meaning of that is that Yunmen used to be the dance of the Yellow Emperor to bring down the heavenly spirits. And so that is sort of like every time we take a breath and enjoy our physicality to a degree where we feel like we are alive right here, right now. It is this celebration of this space that Randine was describing. There is the potential, at least, of going out of polarity and into the space where we are giving, receiving at the same time, and where our very physicality, our very needy instincts are not holding us back on a lower level, but where they can catapult us into this sensory space that brings us in a full body experience of this unity experience, that where that heavenly light can stream into us. And I was also, everything you all said triggered me into, or made me think of this. I don't know whether it's the most important sentence in the Neijing, but Liu Lihong quotes that, my good friend and colleague, he quotes that so often in one of the early chapters of the Neijing. I think it's how yin and yang correspond to the many phenomena in the world. And in there it says, right, yin and yang is the root of heaven and earth, the father and mother of change and transformation. And it has this long list of polarities and how important it is. But at the very end, it says, Shen Ming Zhi Fu Ye. But let's not forget, then it ends that sentence with the yin yang, meaning the polarity of the world is nothing but a vessel of were the immaterial and the material, which is another way, I think, how you can translate Shenming, the light of spirit, is united as one. And the Shenming then becomes a physical experience of the sort that Randine was describing. It's not something we can philosophize about or so, but it is and you can only have that if you have your body. And so that's what I love about not just Chinese culture, but certainly Chinese culture spent so much time in reminding us that a material life and a physical life in the body and a spiritual life, they need to be, for full health, they need to be united as one. We can't deny the body and kind of check out and go into some kind of celestial space or kind of, or if we're doing it for a time, but it's in a certain way not real. And I think we've talked about that before at some other time, how in a certain way, why do we work with the 5 elements? Because 5 is the number of love, right? It's 2 plus 3, the first yin number, the first yang number, and is spirit in matter. It's always these two, this kind of sensory experience of how our body with all of its pore spirits is a receptacle for this heavenly light that then just without us doing anything just can download, and then we can radiate it back out to ourselves and our people around us. So those are some thoughts that, as I was listening to you, came to mind.
Something there that I wanted to pick up on, something that Lorie had said, and then you were speaking about, Heiner. So we've been talking about the Hun and the Po, and Lorie was mentioning how the Po is often depicted as this grasping, this sort of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was coming up as I was listening to you, Heiner, is this sense of, very often when we experience attachment, the next move is to try to detach. Oh, I don't want to do that. Attachment's bad, or I want to somehow get away from it. But I think that there's some sort of message in the Po of when there's a even further leaning into the attachment, but with a certain presence of love that actually moves us closer into the ways in which we have become separated, or we are gripping, or we've become sort of, differentiated into these things that were like these gems that we're clasping onto. There's a way in which that if that grasping is then enveloped through an embrace, there's a way in which that there's a disintegration that occurs, and a seed rushes through to the foundation to then become a sprouting in the erotic unfolding. And there's a way in which, you know, heaven descends and then becomes, it sort of proliferates into all these experiences of divisionality. And if we can find those and love the grasping, rather than it becoming more grasping and more attachment, it actually does the opposite. And we fall our way into a seed moving itself through the cycle. Yeah.
That's just so beautiful, Alexander. And, you know, I think when we first said, what are we going to talk about tonight? Like, we do these little things. And initially, like, the first word we had was compassion. And I was like, well, compassion's a little thin. And then we're like, okay, let's a little more. And, you know, we're like, okay, Eros and Agape. And I remember, Lonny, you wrote it there, and that might bring us right back to compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like what we're really getting to, you know, is that agape, that can we bring that to each other, but also to ourselves, to our both the vulnerability of embodiment, and yet at the same time, like you said, Heiner, this is our chance, right? We've got these bodies, and this is our opportunity to have these experiences. But I'm really getting in real time that the key to this is like this deep compassion for what the body goes through. You know, as you say, Randy, the inevitability of dissolution, that we're like, what can I do to, you know, like, if I have enough in my IRA, if I have enough gems, if I have enough of everything, maybe I won't dissolve, you know, maybe somehow I can avoid this thing, or, you know, at least I'll have enough to pass it on to my kids so they'll avoid it for me or something. But to really get to that place where we are not turning away from that and have compassion for that inevitability, but also for the abjectness of the Po. I mean, this is the thing that I'm really, you know, when we see these drawings of the Po soul, these ancient, you know, drawings of their distortions and their, you know, their oddness, that's really also us. And can we have agape for that? Can we embrace and hold that? Because I really feel, Alexander, what you're saying there is, if we move in towards it rather than turning away from it or exiling it or judge, if we can we embrace it, love it, care for it? That's the transformation. Like, that's where we come around again.
The kids, they only want Bitcoin nowadays. At least mine. But yeah, no. And at the same time, I was just thinking, these experiences that we talking about unity, and even just knowing that the body has this potentiality of at any moment have this, yeah, you could say it's a physical experience of momentary enlightenment, really. Those things we can and should cultivate toward, and doing breathing and yogic movements and all of these things, and I don't know, talk therapy or whatever kind of is helping us at any given moment is helpful for that. I mean, from a Chinese perspective, probably starting with the body, like open up anything that opens the meridians will make us more start right. The lung channel starts right here. And this place is called Ying in Chinese, and Ying is translated as the breast, but it's really the place between the nipple and the collarbone. And it means it's the place where we receive, resonate, and respond. So this is the energetically most sensitive kind of place. And my own experience is, while I'm that sometimes these moments that Randine was describing, and some of these other moments where you maybe intellectually you read something and all of a sudden you get this deep insight, they sometimes you can work toward it, but a lot of the time, and I think this is important also for our listeners, it's grace. It's just sometimes you're trying hard and it's just not happening, and you feel very much in that realm of separation. And then other times it's just you don't even need to think about it. Everything is on a roll, and you in that space more often than not. I remember an astrologer once mentioned in China was just this 28-year-old kid, but he was right on with so many things about what he said about what happened in the past to people in the group. But he said, oh, your best years are 2004 to 2009. And by the time that rolled around, I had already forgotten about it. But if I think about it now, it was my just heart was so open. It was so effortless to be in this space where, I don't know, without shame, you are what now I would feel like you spouting like some narcissistic nonsense or something, but it was the only time in my life where I was able to speak as a teacher to audiences where many people in the audience would cry because there was a resonance and it was a natural thing that just occurred. And it was something that was where it felt like it was not me speaking, but something was speaking through me. And sometimes now these things can happen, but they happen much less for me now. So, so that's important also to recognize that we have this potential, but doesn't always mean we just because we want to or we're trying to, we can get to this place where it's this physical and mental and spiritual experience of the Shenming all at once.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, my experience, so as you're talking, Heiner, and other people are talking, you know, the Eros, the erotic impulse, the evolutionary impulse, creativity, the striving toward union, my love toward that which is higher and longing to be a living example of that which I've seen is possible can be, you know, that's very beautiful and inspirational and a very strong motive, but it can also simultaneously be a denial of who and what I actually am already as that. And agape brings in that here in the moment already being that as someone on the path and the goal are one. And that my aspiration toward that is already that part of me, which is it. And the agape brings in that self-love for who and what I am here. And on the other hand, the agape that sort of loving myself as I am, where I am, for who I am, that can also deny the imperative of being awakened to the evolutionary impulse and having recognized myself as the vehicle for transformation, that life is short. This is my one life. I'm here now. I have a body. And the imperative to be a vehicle to respond to life in a way that actually makes things better. So everything is as it is, and everything could be better, and I'm the vehicle for that. and to be able to hold both that sort of motherly embrace, that in the womb, knowing that, as I said before, that I'm the Eros is the recognition of the self as love, and at lower levels, longing toward union, and at higher and higher levels, less physical union and more of a recognition of just union with what it is I'm striving for. And at the same time, again, that loving embrace and bringing that all together just into one thing. I think I'm just repeating what I've said before, but it really is something I work with and think about every day as somebody who, I just spent 40 years writing books and running a practice, and I've closed my practice and I'm done writing. And a big question has been, well, who am I? Who am I if I don't have some big project? And, the answer is, well, I could always be more kind. I could be more loving. I could learn to listen better. There are so many ways to improve and deepen, and also to just sort of to make more room for the mystery and find out and see what presents itself. And I just thought it was very beautiful and very moving what Randine was talking about in the beginning, because I'm sure we all, to different degrees, recognize, that experience that you had, Randine, and I for me, it's just that recognition is always available in a moment. Even when I'm like, I can see that I'm really lost in ego, I can always take a breath and return to that which you were expressing and find that as a dimension of the self. And I just think that's very beautiful for you to, to see that and to express that. And I thought the words you used expressed it perfectly. So I think, again, for the Po can get distorted into materialism, and the Hun can get distorted into just bypassing, into just bypassing. And from an integral perspective, what does it mean to just hold all of that, the dual and the non-dual, in a non-dual way as one, as two faces of this being and becoming, nirvana and samsara, as the same form and formlessness, as the same one thing. And words fall short, but you beautifully expressed that. And I've also felt, that's why I so look forward to these things, because to one degree or another, that's what's coming through all of us. You feel the urge when each of us is talking, that the Eros, sort of the striving toward union, but also the the agape, the embrace, the care, the tenderness.
As you're speaking, I have this image of the Sheng cycle, or for those who don't know what that is, and the listeners, it's like the wheel of the cycle of birthing and dying and birthing and dying and everything in between. And as you're speaking, Lonny, I have this image of Eros and Agape like growing into each other, where it's like Agape is in this descent, but then actually accompanies Eros on the way up. And as Eros is rising on the way up, it actually accompanies Agape on the way down. And this way in which, as you were speaking, this sense of, often when we're in that place of the evolution, the evolutionary, from seed to bloom, there can be often a sense, you were describing this striving. There can often be a sense of like, I need to get there.
Right. Yes.
But what's really interesting is if agape is allowed to accompany through, then there's that sense of, when I'm the daffodil bulb, I'm completely full and whole as it is. And yet I'm also not in negation to the stalk rising. And then as the stalk is rising, if I have that agape with me, it's like that tenderness reminds me of my wholeness as the stalk, even as I'm incomplete, as that then continues up into blooming. And anyway, that was coming up as you were speaking. Specifically, I'm sure it happens on the other side too, on the way down as Eros sort of moves down with agape, but I was mostly feeling into that growing gesture where I'm complete at every phase, and yet I'm also easefully growing towards the sun.
Well, Eros is the influx of that light that the Po is receiving, which will influxes into us and then will rise and return back to the source in heaven and then influx back in with each breath.
I've been from the very beginning really aware, Lonnie, as you began speaking about the relationship, if we think of Eros as having some kind of relationship to the Hun on the left and this negentropic impulse to rise towards spirit, towards the light, and then the right side being this entropic return, this giving over, this surrendering back to the yin forces, to gravity. And then I keep coming back to the phrase that Claude Lahr and Elizabeth Rochave translated so beautifully in Rooted in Spirit, where they speak to the joining, the marriage of the Hun and Po is life, and their separation is death. And this idea that at that moment, I was really struck, Heiner, by you pointing to this area of the body as this place where, we receive spirit, and the idea of cloud gate and the whole idea of this receptivity, but also that can't happen unless the Hun and the Po are together. Because, of course, we know that the Hun, with that first breath, the Hun lifts the Po out of the intestines, out of the umbilical region of the fetus, and it rises. And that is our life. That's the moment of our life. So I really am feeling like, if we take it that way, that our life is Eros and Agape. It is the Hun and the Po in their marriage. That's our whole experience here, and to keep them connected probably is is the essence of the healing process. So.
And yet there's always the inevitable return where we can't keep them together any longer, and honoring the return.
Their separation. Yeah.
I'm also struck just clinically that of two imperatives that I experience with patients, and one is sort of holding a space of relentless possibility for them, seeing their Buddha nature, and they come in and they have a problem, and there's things to overcome and knots to untie, and to be able to hold all of that, but at the same time to know them as fire, to know them as that creative impulse, that evolutionary impulse, that might express itself as straight ahead, that damn the torpedoes. Let's give it everything we've got and see where we get. And at the same time, to be able to hold them in a very deep compassion and very deep agapic sort of, agapic love of right here, right now, your life and your memories and your body with all the experience you've had exactly as it is the perfect vehicle for expressing spirit. And while some of these goals may seem very, very far away, there's an embrace, an unconditionally loving embrace for that person as whole, right here, right now, sitting in the chair, as well as the imperative of, okay, let's go, we're on this together, straight ahead. And both those things are, both those things have come into a real balance clinically for me. For much of my career, I was like, let's just go, let's just do it. Past is the past, let the dead bury the dead, straight ahead. And I think really what, that the impulse to discover oneself as love comes from this unconditionally loving embrace of oneself as one is, and knowing that, again, that we are held in love. And to hold ourselves, that part of that waking up to who and what we are is that love that both strives toward union with itself through us, as well as holds us and embraces us and is the whole field we exist in, that we're never separate from. And I just find both of those things, the balance of both of those things in clinic, and that balance in clinic comes from an increased balance of that in my life in relationship to my own self, being able to hold myself that way.
I totally agree with that, the way you express that, Lonnie. I find that's true in my own practice now. As a more experienced practitioner, I find that that's what's going on in my practice, and holding both those spaces, being there, seeing the person and loving who they are, and at the same time helping them with their goals, or whatever it is. And also, when you talk about being creative yourself, agape, that love which can only come through you, as you in your body, is the two things are going on at the same time as well. I think you couldn't express yourself the way you express yourself unless something was being transmitted through you. So in that creativity that we all endeavor, both aspects of Eros and Agape come through all the time. So I don't see it as terribly separate. It's evidenced in whatever we do, whether it's writing or painting or photography or treating patients.
I'm reminded of times when I'm working with people and they're connecting to something in themselves that feels like it's stuck or resistant, and they're trying to get this place in them to get unstuck, and it's not working. As they try to get it unstuck, it seems to still be more stuck. And what I often find works is to have them embrace the place in them that is stuck, and to invite them to encourage it to just grab a little tighter, whatever direction it's already gripping, to just invite it with a loving embrace to encourage it. Well, what if you just went in that direction a little bit more? You just grasped a little bit tighter around that gem. And that as soon as they do that, it's usually fairly instantaneous. All of a sudden they encourage it, they go in the direction that the thing is grasping, and then all of a sudden it opens, and it's like the seed was unlocked. The seed was unlocked. Instead of trying to break open the seed shell, there was another magic ticket to help that seed shell just open, and then there's that evolutionary impulse. There's no longer sort of a gripping around a certain sort of immovable structure. And instead there's that impulse to now transform. And often what'll happen is what looked like resistance transforms into virtue once it unlocks, and it's able to grow through that nurturing.
Well, does anyone else have something they'd like to say before we conclude? Well, okay. Very beautiful. I'm gonna just turn off the recording. I think we got somewhere.